welcome Senator the Honourable Sue Lyons, President of the Senate, Mr Richard Pye, Clerk of the Senate, and other officers of the Department of the Senate. President, do you wish to have, and I will specifically also welcome Mr John Begley, Usher of the Black Rod, at the table. President or Mr Pye, do either of you have opening statements this morning?
No, thanks, Chair.
Okay, we'll go straight to questions. Senator Hume.
Thank you, Chair. Clark, my first question is to you, and it's just in relation to a question at estimates and questions on notice that you provided the committee at the last estimates, some clarification around how witnesses should treat questions. So for the benefit of proceedings, I'm hoping that you would once again confirm that, first of all, that senators are not limited by any standing order in the number of questions that they can ask, both during a hearing or on notice.
Richard Pye, Clerk of the Senate. I can confirm that, Senator. There's no standing order that restricts the number of questions that senators can place on notice or ask at estimates.
Thank you. Also that Senate estimates hearings can only release witnesses by agreement or failing agreement where there is no senator present who has further questions for the witnesses.
With the additional option available to committees that they can set a new meeting time for any further questions.
A spillover.
A spillover hearing or in any sort of a hearing.
Thank you. And that questions answered by witnesses at the table or taken on notice for response later are to be treated the same.
Yes, Senator.
Thank you. Also that witnesses should not prevent information that they know to be true from being provided to the Senate or its committees.
That's right, Senator.
Thank you. And finally, can you confirm that preventing information being provided or dissuading the provision of information from a witness that has been sought and is available to provide may be considered a contempt of the Senate?
The Senate has made it clear in its privilege resolutions that someone seeking improperly to prevent material being put before a Senate can be treated as a contempt. I should add the rider, which is mentioned in the Chair's opening statement about the making of public interest immunity claims when witnesses consider there's information that it would not be in the public interest to put before a committee should make a properly formed public interest immunity claim, which is for the committee in the first instance and subsequently the Senate to determine.
Thank you, Clerk. I always think it's helpful to do a reminder of this at the beginning of an estimates process, so I appreciate your cooperation. And I want to just finish this by commending your department and the Department of the Senate generally for the continued, timely and fulsome way that it has always responded to at least to my questions on notice. I don't know about anyone else's, but thank you very much for your assistance there.
Thank you, Senator.
I have some questions around maintenance in particular that have been conducted by the Department of the Senate. So I think that these will probably go through you, through the Black Rod. Yes, thanks, Mr Begley. In response to a question on notice number 1, you provided a timeline in relation to the longest-running maintenance matter at that time, and it shows that the matter was reported both in September 2023, but it wasn't resolved until October 2024. Do you know the reason for that?
John Begley, Usher of the Black Rod. Thank you, Senator. I think the reason it was a little bit hard at times to work out what the problem was, and I think there's a few attempts to try and fix the problem, being a noise in the ceiling, and then it took a while for them to get that solution in place.
So it just took a long time to resolve what the issue was?
Yeah, to work it out and then find a time suitable to replace it.
Okay. So in your timeline, it was in April 2024 that it was identified that a new part was required to fix that issue. That's correct?
Yes, Senator.
Thank you. Who was responsible for requisitioning the new part? Is that the Department of the Senate or is that the Department of Parliamentary Services?
No, Senator, it's the Department of Parliamentary Service. We act as a concierge to make it all happen and liaise with DPS so that your office wouldn't have to, and it's up to then DPS to do the actual work involved.
Thank you. And what was the date then that the new part was requested from the supplier? Is there a written record of that?
I think, Senator, you'd have to talk to DPS about that one.
Okay. In the timeline that you've provided, Mr Begley, you state that from April 23 to October 24 that you requested follow-up from the Department of Parliamentary Services to resolve it. So when you say you requested follow-up, what do you mean by that? Was it email? Was it phone calls? What was it?
Senator, I believe it was emails. We logged those in our system to say we chased approximately once a month to see where the progress was up to.
Can you provide copies on notice of those emails?
I'll see if there are emails or phone calls, and I can give you something, I'm sure. On notice.
Thank you. My concern for this matter is not that it might relate to my office, that's irrelevant, but the fact that it took the better part of a parliamentary term for the department to address it. And now it's rare in the public service to provide departments to have their own in-house maintenance teams, but where we do have them, I think you'd expect that the taxpayer that provides them would think that they were more efficient. This doesn't seem to have been particularly efficient. I'm wondering if you've conducted a review of the processes of how maintenance is conducted and whether it can be done more efficiently.
So I don't think we've conducted a broader review. This one seems to be a bit of an outlier in how long it took to get resolved. And I think from what the team has said, it relates to the age of the system because it's 35 years old now, the air conditioning system. It is coming up due for a more broader review and replacement. And I think that's probably what led a little bit to this, along with, as I said, timing issues around making sure we get access to the space and trying to work out what the problem was in the first instance. But I agree, it did take a very long time for this one to get resolved, which is unusual.
Okay. Do you have any requests for maintenance in the Senate chamber at the moment?
In the Senate chamber at the moment, we're looking at the condition of the benches in the Senate chamber. Some of them are quite worn, as you might have noticed, particularly the high-use ones where the whips and the ministers are, and also the advisor booths. At the moment, we're working on a program to get those refurbished. That's the only thing, really.
Because I've asked this question several times over the course of a number of estimates now. There is an outstanding matter that I'm reliably informed of, that there's a drawer, particularly in the advisors box on the opposition side, that has routinely broken and is unable to close, and that a number of staff have actually been injured by this. Now, I've asked you here whether it can be resolved, and it continues to still not have a permanent resolution, and yet we still have we have staff in place to do exactly this. I'm wondering whether it can be fixed within a reasonable time, and whether you think that I will have to ask this question again at the next estimates.
I hope not. I am aware of that issue, and I thought it had been resolved, so I'll have to go and check and see what the current status of it was. But yes, it was sticking and it wasn't closing properly, and we did log that job when we were aware of it, and I thought it was fixed, so I'll follow that up.
Thank you. I have some questions around furniture purchases, which again I'm following up from previous questions. At the last estimates in previous questions on notice, the department confirmed that since 2015 the department spent around $3.8 million on bespoke designer furniture for the Senate. Now, in response to question on notice number 6, you stated that that included $69,946 for furniture for the new table office and $18,650 for the new sub-table office. I just want to confirm those numbers. Is that correct?
Yes, Senator, that's what we put in our response.
Thank you. Now, in your response, you noted that $70,000 for the table office was for, and I'm going to list them here, workstations, storage units, meeting tables and filing units to accommodate new fit-out to consolidate accommodation footprint. That's right?
That's correct, Senator.
So this work was it's a consolidation.
So we were trying to identify a way to free up some space for other projects in the building and other accommodations. So we moved our Parliamentary Education Office into another space, which meant we had to move another office out of that one and find a home for them.
Right.
So we refurbished the table office to be able to fit 2 areas into one, so we can make more efficient use of the space, essentially.
So it's a reduction inside. That's what consolidation.
It's 2 groups going into place where one used to be.
Right.
So we've doubled the sort of amount of staff in that area by refurbishing the area. In the other part of that puzzle was above that is where there are 3 new Senate suites were required to be built at the beginning of this Parliament.
Right.
Part of that involved drilling holes straight through the concrete slab above, needing us to then also pull apart the table office. So we took advantage of that work being done to then do a broader refit and make more efficient use of that space.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So there must have been a surplus of old furniture then once this was done?
We have some furniture in storage. I wouldn't say we have a lot. It came down to finding furniture that would fit that new space. It's consistent with the furniture that's used in Senators' office suite. It's the same sort of furniture. It's nothing out of the ordinary. It's really just the usual filing cabinets and sit-stand desks and those sorts of things.
What do we do with old furniture?
With things that we can't use anymore, we look at either whether we can dispose of it or if anyone will sell it, but usually it's hard to get rid of.
So when you say dispose of it, what does that mean?
It can be just in the end thrown out if it needs to be, but usually we try and find ways to get rid of it, but there's not much market for second-hand office furniture that's getting on 30 years old.
Even from Parliament House, you'd think it might have some intrinsic value?
Chair, sentimental value.
If you have a look at some of the old furniture, I don't think there's much. It was at the end of its life.
I mean, I have a reputation for hoarding, but...
If you'd like some, Senator, I've got plenty.
I'm sure some other senators... I don't
What if we were to certify that you'd sat in a particular chair, Senator McGrath? Would that increase
whether people might like
value?
to buy some of the furniture. I'm not saying putting an ad on Gumtree, but there might be some demand out there.
In the sort of the way Commonwealth disposals have to work, we would need to do a public auction for those things. But generally, when we speak to the auction houses, they're not interested because it's very late.
Otherwise, it goes to what we call in Warwick the tip.
Yeah.
Can you let the public know when it's all off to the tip? Senator Hume, I'll give you a couple more minutes and then I'll rotate the call to Senator Pocock.
Okay, thank you. Obviously $70,000 for the table office is a considerable amount of money, and I understand that we're playing Tetris in this building, but it still does sound like a considerable investment. And I want to continue on the issue around taxpayer money's use of furniture in parliamentary departments when we speak to DPS. But I'm wondering if you can confirm if the Department of the Senate is considering any more pieces to add to the furniture collection in the next financial year.
At this stage, Senator, the only thing we are looking at is some additional desks for Senator's office. There seems to be a large appetite for additional staff to fit into offices, and we don't have any spares left at the moment, so we may need to purchase a few additional units.
Are they off the shelf, though? They're not necessarily...
Exactly the same as the table office ones. They're custom with the right colour legs and the right colour tabletop, and, as you can imagine, to fit into the aesthetic of the building.
Yeah, okay. All right.
And the design integrity.
Chair, I have some more questions, but I'm happy to see
Senator Pocock.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for your time this morning. On the 20th of November last year, Senator Lambie moved a motion in the Senate on behalf of the Senate crossbench, noting the lack of drafting resources and calling for more legislative drafters to be provided to the Department of the Senate. The Senate agreed to that motion. I'm interested what additional drafting resources have been provided to the Senate crossbench.
Is that to me or to...
Anyone who's got some info?
Yeah, so we acted on the order and additional resources were given to the Department of the Senate.
For how long was that?
The government arranged for OPC to provide us with a second full-time drafter for that last sitting period last year. At the same time, a new position, a position of legislative drafter in the procedure office was being filled at exactly the same time. So we've got that additional resource. We'll be having a look at whether we can swing more people into that office as the, if assuming the demand continues, Senator. I always think that it's worth thinking about the fact that it doesn't matter how many resources we brought to bear in relation to that work. When the Senate makes decisions of the nature of suddenly deciding to rearrange its program and require that 20 or 30 bills that people might not have been expecting to be dealt with are suddenly going to be dealt with, no amount of legislative drafting resources provided to us or anyone is going to be able to square that circle, Senator.
No, I understand that, but I guess as an independent Senator, not having a private citizens bill drafted for over 6 months, a relatively simple bill because of the lack of drafting resources. And so I'm interested, those resources, it was just for that last sitting period. It's not an ongoing.
The additional OPC draft was for that last sitting period,
Okay.
yes, Senator.
So the Senate says this is an issue, more drafters for the crossbench, and you give us for 2 weeks, and then that's problem solved, President? What's going to happen in the future?
I mean, it's not directly a
Yeah,
matter.
my role, Senator Pocock, is to act on the order. I acted on it immediately. Those questions should really go to the government.
Within the funding that the department has, it's our intention to continue to do what we've been doing for the last 6 years, Senator, which is to continue to bring more people into that work as we can. We used to have about 5 people operating in that space. Then we had 7. Now we have 9. We'll continue to do that as we can. But you can't instantly produce legislative drafters. They're not. They're a bit thin on the ground. When we train our staff up to work in this environment, in those roles, it takes a little bit of time. But we're building a larger pool of people who can do that work. And we'll continue to do that.
And, President, where can I put these questions to government?
I guess to the Minister for Finance. I don't really know Senator Pocock, but that's where I'd start.
Okay. I'm just concerned that they'll probably send me back here, but I'll try that.
Senator Pocock, I don't have a budget as the President, and my role is to act on orders of the Senate, and I acted on it immediately that day.
But I guess my point is only for 2 weeks, and then we're back to the status quo. And I just wanted to raise, looking at the 67th report from the Senate Appropriations Staffing and Security Committee notes, and I'll quote, "The committee endorsed measures for additional funding in relation to the department's workforce capacity for legislative drafting, parliamentary education outreach and membership costs for an international parliamentary organisation. The government considered these proposals, but they were not funded in the budget." I'm interested what the proposal put forward by the Department of the Senate for additional drafters was that the committee endorsed.
It was to provide for 2 additional full-time drafting positions, Senator.
And what reason did the government provide for not funding these additional drafters?
I think there's a comment in that same report about the government's stance.
It says, "The committee acknowledges the government's expenditure and staffing policies and agreed to the budget outcomes." So I'm just interested, what was the actual reason? That doesn't really tell me.
I'd have to go back and look at that on notice, Senator.
Okay, thank you. That'd be great. And just, this is an issue that's come up again and again in this Parliament. Has any analysis been done about what is needed in terms of drafting capability and capacity for a growing crossbench?
I think it's something that I've talked about in annual reports going back through the entire time that I've been clerk, Senator. A growing crossbench does tend to have the effect of increasing the demand for legislative drafting, which makes sense. There's more disparate voices on the crossbench, each seeking to have their viewpoint put forward, particularly in relation to legislative work. But it's a bit of a movable feast, Senator. The demand in this Parliament, we've got 21 senators on the crossbench, which is equal to the largest number of senators that we've ever had on the crossbench. But the demand for legislative drafting in this Parliament has continued in a way that it didn't the last time that we had that number of people on the crossbench. So it's a difficult thing to say, oh yes, we'll need this many drafters for these weeks doing this sort of work. So we rely, as everyone across the rest of the public sector relies, on trying to find ways to prioritise work so that we can do the best work that we can within the resources available.
And that being the case, are you concerned that when you ask for an additional 2 drafters, the government says no?
That's a matter you'd have to raise with the government, Senator. All departments and agencies have to operate within the budget that they end up having.
And were those 2 additional drafters that were requested to take into account not only the growing crossbench, but clearly the growing need for drafting for the crossbench to move amendments on behalf of their states or territories?
proposition was put forward and endorsed by the Appropriations and Staffing Committee in recognition of the demonstrated increase in demand for drafting, particularly of legislative amendments, with the government having a reasonably ambitious legislative program at the time, that the level of demand has continued at a very elevated level, Senator. We will do what we can to bring more people into that picture, but we also have to try to work within our budget.
Sure. And President, did you back the clerk's request for an extra 2 drafters to add to the capacity?
Yes, I took the submission to the Appropriations Committee, and the Appropriations Committee endorsed it, and it went through.
Okay, well, thank you. And just on behalf of crossbenchers, will we see how hard all the staff, and I think particularly the drafters, work? So not having a crack at them at all, really want to thank them for the work and hope that the Senate will actually solve this issue, because it seems fundamental to our democracy with a growing crossbench to actually allow them to move amendments and have private senators' bills drafted.
Chair, can I take the call back?
I will now rotate the call, although I just need to, you concluded your question, Senator
Yes, thanks, Chair.
Pocock. Senator Hume and Senator Colbeck, you've got the call for the next 10 minutes, and then we go to Senator Barbara Pocock.
Thank you, Chair. I want to ask some questions regarding a question notice that number 66, and in that response, it was relating to expenditure on external professional development providers, and you stated that the department spent $40,764 over the course of 4 months on external professional development providers. That's correct?
Yes, Senator, so we've got an answer.
Thank you. Can you just explain to me exactly what that money was spent on, what training it was?
Yes, and I've taken on notice. I don't have a breakdown in front of me on that one.
You don't remember?
We do a variety of professional developments, and I don't know exactly what would make up the bulk of that off the top of my head.
Right. Okay. So it's only for select staff, not all staff?
I can give you an example. We will do training for the committee office who might take distressing phone calls, counsel like lifeline counselling, suicide prevention, all those sort of things. It's mostly things that are offered to the whole department in general, or there may be certain conferences where a small number of people attend.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you think on notice you could provide a list of the providers that the department has engaged with professional development? Thank you.
Certainly.
And I just want to follow up on some issues that I know I've raised before regarding access to senators' suites. And Mr. Beckley, I know, you and I have had this conversation before, that my suite was accessed improperly at some stage last year, and I asked some questions about this. And on notice, you answered, particularly questions on notice 105, 106 and 107. The department reiterated the policy that is available, and you provided a copy of the security circular that states that access protocols relating to access to suites. I'm just after, could you tell me the date of that circular that you provided?
So I have to take that on notice.
I can tell you it's 2003, so it's a kind of old circular. Now, I know the protocols are probably the same, but the security system has changed quite dramatically since that time. So can you let me know whether anybody still issues keys to offices?
The only keys we issue to Senate suites are the internal keys. So if you wanted to lock your senator's office off from the rest of the office, then we would issue a key for that. But I don't think we'd have any on issue at the moment.
Right. So they're the only keys that work?
To the senators' offices.
Yeah.
There are keys that would work, like master keys, to open the suites, but they're strictly controlled.
Right.
Yeah.
But master keys obviously aren't issued. Yes.
No, that's correct.
So how long ago was it that we had the suites updated with the electronic passes?
So I have to take that on notice. It's a few years ago now, though.
Okay. Yeah. I'm concerned that the security circular that's over 20 years old is probably inappropriate and does need to be updated. Is that something that has been considered?
Yep.
Yes. Okay. Your answer to question on notice 106 states that you're in the process of updating those protocols. I'm after what date you started working on updating the protocols.
I've taken on notice, Senator.
Okay. Was there a catalyst to that update? I mean, obviously it's very old. We've had security passes for a long time now. What was it that made somebody go, hang on, 2003 is probably a little bit outdated?
It was the new EAC system and the card readers and things. So that process has been going for a little while now. And we obviously have to work with the other part of the House as well,
right,
with the House of Reps, and also with DPS. So I think in some ways it's probably been overtaken a little bit by other policies that are now sort of more global around access to the building. But yes, it's still relevant in lots of the principles in that document as well, but we will update it.
Okay. You can understand that, I know that, we work in a place where potentially time is a relative concept, but a year to fix a maintenance problem, 20 years to update a security circular, even after we've had security cards for a considerable number of years now, do you think that doesn't feel good enough to me? I'm interested in your perspective, though.
Yeah, I understand your concern, Senator, and it is something that we are working on. I think there are a lot of other policies in place, though, that will add protections as well. This is one that's really about the houses and how they want to manage the suite access, and I said the broad principles are still current. So.
Question on Notice 105. You provided the Code of Practice for the Electronic Access Control System. However, it didn't state in that question on notice whether I, as a parliamentarian, can access the data of who comes into my office. And I wonder, and I expect that many of my colleagues do too, that they would be surprised to know that we can't access that information.
You can request that access, Senator.
So I can request it. If I sought the information of who to access my office, I can get that.
Yes, Senator, you can ask for it, and if it meets the Code of Practice, then you'd be entitled to have it.
Right. So, first of all, who do I request it from?
You request it from DPS, from the security operations, I think it is, or security systems, and then requests of that sort of nature may end up going to the President if it's outside of the usual request.
And how long would I have to wait to access that information, do you think?
It'd probably take a few weeks, I'd say, to get it through the process.
A few weeks?
But these are really questions that's probably better placed at DPS, who might be able to give you some better ideas.
Okay. Do you know how that information would be provided? Do I get a table, or do...
I think it would come in a spreadsheet, but again, probably better for DPS.
Has it been done before?
Access for data, yes, certainly, yeah.
Okay.
Reports are given to the Appropriations Staffing and Security Committee on all access requests.
Has a report been requested by parliamentarians before?
I'm sure they would have been, Senator.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Senator, parliamentarians regularly request data about accessing their suite. It's on the EACS report, which goes to the Appropriations Committee.
Oh, thank you for that, President. So, Mr. Begley said it would have to potentially go through to you to be authorised.
No, only if it's outside of the guidelines.
Right. Okay. How often does that happen?
Oh, rarely. Once or twice.
Once or twice a year? Once or twice a term?
I can recall I've had, I think, one request in the last 12 months, I think,
Okay.
but, that's not correct. I'll come back to you. But
That's all right. And what would be considered outside the guidelines? What's within the guidelines as opposed to outside the guidelines?
So something like the request that you're talking about would be well within the guidelines.
Mm-hmm.
This is it's pretty commonly done for senators, members, ministers wanting to do an audit of who has access to their suite when they've got changes in staffing and that sort of thing. That happens pretty frequently. It is a matter for DPS, but I understand it's a pretty straightforward process. But other requests for data from the EAC system and the CCTV system, you can imagine that there's a range of complicated circumstances in which people might be looking for that information, and that would have to go through either higher levels in DPS or the President if it went outside of the usual things that are covered in the policy.
Okay. The reason I ask this question is that swipe access to the building for staff outside of certain hours is meant to be provided to the relevant employer as a recommendation of the Foster Review. So I'm wondering if that's being done.
yes.
It is. Okay, thank you. And how long is that data stored for?
Yeah, these are really questions for DPS.
Okay, all right.
It's covered in the EACTS code, but I think it's 90 days,
Right,
and then
no.
it's destroyed. I think, but it is a question for DPS.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Chair.
240. Senator Colbeck.
Yeah, just a couple of quick questions. President, in the circumstance of Parliament being recalled for extraordinary sittings, what is your role?
I'm advised by the Leader of the Government in the Senate, and I would consult with the clerk and make a decision.
So there's a decision-making process for you. Just run us quickly through the process. So you would receive a request from the leader of the government or leaders?
No, because the Senate is a separate chamber, so...
No, I understand. No.
Yeah.
Well, leaders in the Senate. I should have
There are
been
two
more
different,
specific.
there are two different mechanisms that can be used. One, which is in Standing Order 55, I think it is, which says the President will set a new time and day for a sitting of the Senate at the request of an absolute majority of senators.
Okay.
That's the one that we've most frequently seen in play in recent years. There's theoretically another power, which is in a motion that's moved at the end of sitting periods before there's a reasonable break, which is a motion that says that the President or the Deputy President in her absence can fix another time. That can be done at the request of the government. So the government can say, we need to come back to do X, Y and Z. But that really has fallen into really abeyance. Every time I think the Senate has come back for an unusual sitting in the past 30 years, it's been done by way of some sort of a request from an absolute majority of senators. So the two leaders writing to the President saying, please, can you arrange for the Senate to sit on Friday? And the President then writes to all senators to advise them of the time and date. The detail of that's in that standing order I mentioned.
So the effect of determining the majority of senators would be a letter from the two leaders to the President saying can you please recall the Parliament?
Yes, Senator.
Okay. And you've not received any such requests, Senator Lyons? President, sorry?
I don't believe so, no.
Not recently.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you to the Department of the Senate.